We are in segment 2 of our writing interview packages session, and we have gone through determining what's a fact and what's a quote. After you sort through and get your list of facts and quotes, the next step is to put them in a logical order where they seem to tell the story. Once you have them in a logical order, though, you need to use your words to transition. So you need to summarize your facts. Well, okay. Here are my materials. I got all my facts over here. Some facts I pulled from the interviews, some facts I knew before. Some facts are good things that would be good to look up, and others are partial stuff that I took from what he said in the interview because I might want to use what's next as a quote, but I needed to know this fact to be able to lead into this quote. And these are all the quotes. So I take that and I make a script. I make a script, I transition. Here's a fact, here's a quote, here's a fact, here's a quote. I have my own words used as a transition to bridge between the quotes. There are multiple types of transitions, and there are some factors that you need to consider when making transitions. First of all, don't play by play the interview. What I mean by that is don't say, I asked, and he said. He said, when I asked, here's what he said about this. What's the problem with all those? They're wasted words. We don't need to hear who said what. We can infer that people had a conversation and said stuff. Get to the point. What's the meaning? Also, don't restate what was just said. For instance, he says, I grew up playing football. I really loved the game. He just said that, and now you say, he enjoyed football growing up. I mean, it's exactly what he just said. You are not adding anything. So you can draw conclusions based on what they say and use that to transition, but don't just paraphrase what they just said or what they're just about to say, because it's not giving us any new information. It's wasting our time. Finally, don't steal the spotlight from what's about to be said. And by that, I mean, don't say what's about to be said. I feel like there's a sports term for this, like telescoping your play or something like that. You make sure that everybody, just don't steal the spotlight. Don't say what the quote's about to say. Hint at it or tease it. Hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate how that might come up as we go through my examples. When you're making transitions, I've determined there are 3 different ways to make a transition. There are bridge transitions. Bridge transitions give a paraphrase referring to the info that's come up before, and they use it to lead into the topic that's next. As an example, I have, because of that, he went to St. Louis. So whatever he was saying before, you just add in as your reporter voice, because of that, he went to St. Louis. What did he do in St. Louis? His quote's going to say that part. But you just gave him a little bit of a link between what he just said and what he will say next. For fact quotes, they're talking about a topic that's factual. You can look something up on it, and you may have a question as they're talking about it. Wait, what are the symptoms of that? So look it up and add it in for your viewers. And that's the fact transition. You just add a fact in, paraphrase it in your own words, and credit your source. Fact. This is an easy one to do. A lot of people say way more than they need to say. So trimming the fat is they're jumbling up to what their main point is. They're saying a fact that you think, oh, I need to make sure the viewers know that, but I don't need them to hear all the rest of this. So trim that fat. Get rid of all that stuff that they don't need to hear. Keep that key piece of information and just say it to lead into the next quote. So I'll give you some examples of that. Anytime you are introducing somebody in your package, you need to make sure that their name comes up. Sometimes it's easy with video to just put a lower third up, but it's also good to give the audio in case somebody's not watching. So introduce the person. Say their name and title, how they relate to this topic. But avoid saying, this is Beth. Meet Beth. We interviewed Beth. I talked to Beth. Those are wasted words and they're obvious. Instead, tell them a fact and drop Beth's name into it. That way they discover that's her name and that's something about her. So, Beth Vickers works for Mesquite Social Services. Or, the mayor said, Beth Vickers disagrees. And then show Beth Vickers and what she said that disagrees. Okay? Here's how we're going to practice writing transitions. Step 1, we're going to go through and identify types of transitions to look at them as examples. So I've written the whole COVID home script. You're going to see some of the transitions I wrote and go, is that a bridge? Is that a fact? Or is that trim the fat? Obviously, you won't be able to pick out trim the fat stuff because you won't see what part of the quote's missing. So most of the time it'll be a bridge or a fact. Then, after you have been able to pick out trim the fat, bridge, and fact transitions, you'll write some of your own. And I'll give you direct instructions on how to do that. And I'd just like to see what would you put in for your one sentence or couple of sentences over this to transition from this quote to this quote. Finally, you'll get to see my final script. You'll get to review it and see how my transitions compare to yours, so you can kind of get an idea of if you hit the mark or not. Then the last step is, after you have it all lined up, you have the script all written, you record the script, then you got to put B-roll on it, because we don't want black spots where the narrator's talking and you can't see them, and we don't want just the guy's face the whole time. So we need to think, what pictures now go with this package? So you'll put a comment with a link to a picture that could be used for this package, which means there are no copyright issues with using it. Okay, so let's get to it. At the beginning of every script, you need an introduction. I've gone ahead and written the introduction, but keep in mind, the introduction should be a couple of sentences making the connections, kind of explaining why did you interview the person. So I'll play that for you.
COVID is a new experience for the general population. Flu epidemics are something we read about in the history books. At the age of 94, Jimmy Holmes lived through some of this history, and his experiences can enlighten our perceptions of today's circumstances.
That was my intro. Then I get to my first bridge. And sadly, the text disappears when I play this because it gets blurry. The bridge, though, it refers back to the main topic and then teases what's ahead. So here's how it does that.
The pandemic is something that crept up into the ordinary lives of us all and affected us more deeply than we envisioned.
Okay, so it affected us. Now, how did it affect Jimmy? We're about to find that out. I didn't ask the question. I didn't pose the question. I didn't tell him what question I asked him, which would have been play-by-play. I just go straight into his quote.
I didn't feel much about it. I just was careful about the things.
See, that's related to what I just said. He didn't feel much about it. It surprised him too. Okay. Here is where you're going to write in a transition later on. So you'll listen to what's before and what's after. I'll let you do that on your own. Here you'll write in another bridge transition. So try to relate those to kind of what I did, and here are the steps to do that. Now, I want you to pick out what type of transition is this. So I'll play the content before and after so you can kind of get an idea of what type of transition is this. And I'm muting my audio. Oh, no, I'm not. Okay.
I've had some occasions during my life when we had people quarantined for various things, but nothing, of course, on this level at all.
Holmes can reflect back on the early 1900s.
World War I was about 7 years before me, or 8 years.
Okay, you don't need to hear any more of that. But is that a fact quote? Do I give them an additional fact? Is that a bridge quote where I kind of refer to the topic we're talking about and then tease what's next? Or is it a trim the fat quote? Now let's move on to the next one.
And their flu epidemic was something people talked about for all my life.
The first big public health scares in his life came early on.
If a person in a home down the street from us, which there were two or three of them in my block.
Okay. So hopefully you've heard enough of that to kind of know, is that a bridge, a fact, or a trim the fat transition? Here, I will direct you on how to write a fact transition. So you'll write in a fact transition. And you can see the facts are tied to something you can have facts about, like measles. Okay, here I will show you exactly where the fat is. This is fat. And you will determine what from this fat do you need. You'll use that as your quote, and you'll write what quote you need in here. Here's where the quote starts. So you'll write what fact you need to lead into that quote. That's how you trim the fat. Now let's look at this.
Something you don't want.
Malaria.
Okay.
That had malaria, and I found out what that is, and it's something you don't want.
Malaria is spread through the bites of infected mosquitoes. It often comes with a high fever and shaking chills. According to Mayo Clinic, about 210 million people are infected each year. COVID.
Okay. So I split this up. I had two transitions right next to each other. One, what type of transition was that? A bridge, a fact, or trim the fat? And then to lead into the next content, I still needed some more. So
It threatens us not just through issues of physical health, but also through economic pressures. Will this be another Great Depression? Jimmy remembers the first.
We didn't think
ooh, what type of transition was that?
anything about having holes in the knees of our trousers.
I say Jimmy remembers the first, and he starts describing the first. Notice I didn't say Jimmy had to live with holes in his trousers through the Great Depression. That would have stole the spotlight. Instead, I just teased the information. That's a hint as to what type of transition that is. Moving along. Okay, we get to the end right here. Really, you can see there's a block. This is about 1 minute. You don't want too much content of you talking or the other person talking all at once. But these led well into each other, so I had them all together.
Like they were worse than
Okay. So our last one, which type is this?
the economy. In my own business that I owned, it was a struggle to make things meet when we would have those short, depressive years, and I felt like they were worse than they were.
As for what we can do to help, Jimmy reflects on his mother's initiative to help the poor neighbors on their street during the Great Depression.
Mother would, any time there was anything significant left over, and in fact, she would put stuff with it.
Okay, so hopefully you've heard enough of that. Which type is it? A bridge, add a fact, or trim the fat? You'll find that one is used more often than all the others. With that said, through the rest of the video, you will have an export of the package I wrote with on-screen prompts for what to do. I've showed you those on-screen prompts as we go along. Here's one example. There will be holes in the audio where you need to write in these transitions. You've already ID'd which type of transition my examples were, and you don't have to answer that on your worksheet, but you can put in those labels if you find it helpful. Where you write in your text samples, here's where I gave you my examples, and you were to identify which type they were. So now all you have to do is write in these boxes. I've inserted comments on the video, the segments where the quote begins and then the next quote ends, so you can easily jump to those parts to help put your answers into the worksheet. There's one step remaining for you. After all this is done, when you submit this assignment, you'll get a link which will lead to my final script where you can review it and compare it to what you have submitted here. Then you'll need to identify throughout the script what is a picture that I can look up as B-roll. You'll find that picture and post the link in a comment in that document.